So, I discovered my spouse was having an affair in probably the worst way imaginable. A hospital worker called me in the middle of the night and casually mentioned the guy who'd been riding shotgun when their vehicle slammed into a utility pole around 2 in the morning. That one phone call obliterated my entire marriage before I could even wrap my head around the fact that my partner had nearly been eliminated. But here's the brutal truth that nobody really wants to acknowledge. The instant I found out she wasn't driving alone, something inside me just switched off. I stopped worrying about whether she'd make it through, and yeah, I realized how absolutely terrible that sounds. But stick with me here, because I'm not actually the bad guy in this mess. I'm Dominic, 33 years old, and this whole nightmare went down about 10 months back. Some mornings I wake up and it feels like it happened yesterday. Other times it seems like ancient history. I genuinely thought my marriage was rock solid. We'd been a couple for 6 years total, officially married for 4 of those. And we had that kind of connection where we'd still kiss each other goodbye every morning and send ridiculous memes back and forth while we were supposed to be working. My wife's name is Natasha. She's 31, does something in the marketing world. And she's got this magnetic personality that makes everyone at social gatherings gravitate toward her. She's witty and charismatic and has this uncanny ability to say exactly what people need to hear to feel valued. I honestly thought I'd hit the jackpot. I thought I'd somehow managed to find someone who genuinely wanted to share their entire life with me. Looking back at it now, I can see how ridiculously naive that perspective was. But at that point in time, I was absolutely convinced we were thriving together. That particular Friday night, Natasha walked into our living room already holding her packed weekend bag and informed me she was heading out to visit her friend Bethany for a couple days. Apparently, Bethany had just been through this devastating breakup, and Natasha felt like she needed to be there for emotional support. She went on about how Bethany was completely falling apart, constantly crying, barely eating, the whole dramatic situation. I remember actually thinking it was really thoughtful that my wife cared so deeply about her friendships. I even carried her bag out to the vehicle for her. I asked whether she wanted me to check her tire pressure since it had been quite a while since her last maintenance appointment. And she just laughed and gave me a kiss and said I was always overthinking everything. She promised she'd be perfectly fine and would send me a message once she arrived safely. I stood there in the driveway waving like some kind of idiot as she drove away, then headed back inside to finally watch that film I'd been meaning to catch. I trusted her without question. That's the part that makes me want to destroy something every single time it crosses my mind. I trusted her so completely and utterly that I didn't doubt a single syllable that came out of her mouth. She sent me a text around 9 that evening saying she'd gotten there without any problems and that Bethany was in even worse condition than she'd anticipated. I responded with a heart emoji and told her to give Bethany a hug from me. Then I went to bed by myself, assuming my wife was being a supportive friend, and drifted off feeling fortunate that I'd married someone with such genuine compassion. I even remember thinking, right before I fell asleep, how lucky Bethany was to have a friend like Natasha. How lucky I was to have a wife who valued her friendship so much. The irony of that thought now makes me physically ill. Saturday morning rolled around and I woke up expecting some kind of message from Natasha. Maybe a picture of her and Bethany having breakfast or doing some kind of wellness activity together. Nothing came through. I figured they'd probably slept late. By noon, I was starting to feel slightly uneasy about the silence, but I didn't want to be that controlling husband who needs constant updates every few minutes. By 6 in the evening, I'd sent 3 separate texts and attempted to call twice. Both calls went straight to voicemail. Now I was legitimately concerned. You know that sensation where something feels fundamentally wrong, but you can't quite identify what's triggering that feeling? That's exactly where my head was at. By 1 in the morning, I was literally pacing circles around our house, trying to figure out if I was being paranoid or if something was genuinely wrong. I came incredibly close to calling the authorities. I was actually looking up the non-emergency contact number when my phone suddenly rang, unknown caller. I answered instantly, heart absolutely pounding, half expecting that maybe Natasha had somehow lost her phone or something along those lines. The woman speaking had that professionally calm tone that medical professionals use when they're preparing to deliver information nobody wants to hear. She asked if I was Dominic Castellano, and I confirmed my identity and asked who was calling. She explained she was calling from County General Hospital and that my wife Natasha had been brought in roughly an hour earlier following a vehicular collision. She said Natasha was in stable condition but had sustained various injuries and that I needed to get there as quickly as possible. Everything sort of blurred for a moment. My wife was hospitalized. My wife had been in a serious accident. My wife could have been eliminated. I told her I was leaving immediately, that I could make it there in 20 minutes, asking repeatedly if Natasha was going to be okay and what exactly had happened. The nurse went through the details, explaining that Natasha had suffered a concussion, multiple lacerations, and what they suspected might be a fractured rib. She mentioned that Natasha was conscious and had been asking for me, but then she added something that made my entire body go cold. "Sir, I need to inform you that your wife was not the only person in the vehicle." I completely froze. My brain needed several seconds to actually process what she'd just told me. I asked her to clarify what she meant by that statement. "The other individual in the vehicle was a Mr. Jasper Thornton," she said. "He was also injured in the collision and is currently receiving treatment in the emergency room." Complete silence. Total, absolute silence. Not the kind where you're searching for the right words to say. The kind where every thought in your entire head has just been completely erased and replaced with one single screaming question. Jasper Thornton. I knew that name. Natasha had brought him up before, always casually, always just in passing conversation. He was some kind of artist type, did freelance design work, and apparently they'd met at some networking event her company had organized several months back. She'd mentioned that Jasper had connected her with a graphic designer, or that he'd recommended some art gallery downtown. Jasper, the guy she'd never once suggested I should actually meet in person. The guy whose name came up just frequently enough to seem normal, but not so often that it would raise any red flags. The nurse asked if I was still on the line, and I managed to say yes, that I was still listening. She asked if I would be coming to the hospital that night. I looked around my living room, at the couch where Natasha and I had watched countless movies together, at the framed photos on the wall from our wedding day, at the coffee table where, just the previous morning, we'd eaten breakfast together, and she'd vented about her boss while I listened like a supportive husband. I thanked her quietly for the call and said I appreciated her informing me. She started to say something else about Natasha asking for me, but I disconnected before she could finish that sentence. I set my phone down on the kitchen counter very carefully, like it was made of fragile glass that might shatter if I wasn't gentle enough with it. Then I sat down at the table and stared at the wall for what could have been 5 minutes or 5 hours. I genuinely couldn't tell you which. My wife had lied directly to my face. She hadn't gone to see Bethany at all. She'd gone to be with Jasper Thornton. She'd looked me straight in the eyes, kissed me goodbye, allowed me to help her pack her bag, and driven off to spend the night with another man. And then she'd crashed with him in the car at 2 in the morning, coming back from wherever they'd been together, doing whatever they'd been doing. I didn't cry, I didn't yell or scream, I didn't throw objects or punch walls or do any of those dramatic things you see people do in films when they discover they've been betrayed. I just sat there, feeling like someone had reached directly into my chest and scooped out everything that made me a functioning human being, leaving behind just this empty shell that still remembered how to breathe. That's the moment my marriage actually ended. Not when I eventually filed the legal paperwork, not when I moved my belongings out. Right there, sitting at my kitchen table at 2:30 in the morning, still wearing the t-shirt I'd slept in, holding a phone that wouldn't stop buzzing with calls from the hospital that I had absolutely no intention of answering. My wife was lying in a hospital bed asking for me, and I wasn't going to go, and everyone was going to think I was some kind of monster. And I didn't care at all because the person I'd promised to love in sickness and in health had just revealed herself to be someone I didn't even recognize. Let me pause here for a second, because I know what some of you are probably thinking right now. You're thinking, I should have gone to that hospital, that I should have at least verified she was going to be okay before making any major decisions about our relationship. And maybe you're absolutely right about that. But here's what I realized sitting at that table. The incredibly elaborate lies she'd constructed, the fake crisis with Bethany, the meticulous planning, all of it told me this wasn't some spontaneous mistake. This was calculated and deliberate. When someone can look you directly in the eyes and lie that smoothly and convincingly, what else might they be capable of? That question absolutely terrified me more than anything else. I didn't go to the hospital that night, and I'm fully aware that makes me sound like a cold and heartless person. But let me tell you what I actually did instead. I sat at my kitchen table until the sun came up, staring at my phone while it buzzed and buzzed with calls from numbers I didn't recognize, and I let every single one of them go straight to voicemail. I wasn't trying to be cruel or vindictive. I was in complete shock. The kind of shock where your brain just completely shuts down because it can't process what's happening to you. Like when you touch something so incredibly hot that for a split second, you don't even register the pain. You just feel absolutely nothing. That's exactly where I was. Nowhere. My wife was in a hospital bed asking for me, and I was sitting in our kitchen, coming to terms with the fact that everything I thought I knew about my life was completely false. But I couldn't just sit there forever doing nothing at all. So, around 7 in the morning, when I figured people would actually be awake and functional, I did the only thing that made any sense to me in that moment. I called Bethany, Natasha's friend, the one she was supposedly visiting, the one who was supposedly going through this terrible breakup, and needed my wife's support so desperately that Natasha had to drop everything and drive up there for the entire weekend. Bethany answered on the fourth ring, sounding groggy and confused, and I asked her if Natasha was still there with her. There was this long pause, then Bethany asked me what I was talking about. I explained that Natasha had driven up Friday evening to spend the weekend with her, to help her through her breakup. And was she okay? Could I possibly talk to Natasha for a second? Another pause, even longer this time. Dominic, I'm not going through any breakup, Bethany said. And Natasha's definitely not here. I haven't actually seen her in like 3 weeks. Is everything all right? I thanked her, told her everything was perfectly fine, and disconnected before she could ask any more questions. I felt something physically crack inside my chest. It wasn't even the affair itself. I mean, yes, the affair was absolutely horrible, but people have affairs all the time. People make mistakes. People get weak or stupid or selfish. What actually broke me was the lie, the planning, the absolute deliberateness of it all. Natasha hadn't just cheated on me in some moment of weakness or poor judgment. She had constructed an entire false reality from scratch. She had picked Bethany's name specifically because she knew I wouldn't question it. She had invented a breakup, invented a crisis, looked me directly in the eyes and told me this elaborate story and let me help her pack her bag. Let me kiss her goodbye. Let me worry about her tire pressure, for crying out loud. She had texted me from wherever she actually was, pretending to be at Bethany's place, telling me Bethany was worse than expected. Every single word was calculated and planned. Every single moment was a performance. And I had believed absolutely all of it because I trusted my wife completely. I needed to see the vehicle. I don't know exactly why. Maybe I thought seeing the physical evidence would make it feel real. Or maybe I just needed something concrete and tangible to hold on to because my entire reality had just dissolved into nothing. I called the police department and asked where vehicles from accidents got towed to, and they gave me the address of an impound lot on the east side of town. I drove there around 10 in the morning, showed them my identification and our marriage certificate, along with the vehicle registration, and they let me through to examine the vehicle. The car was worse than I'd imagined it would be. The entire front end was crumpled like a tin can. The windshield was completely shattered, and there was dried blood on the driver's side headrest that made my stomach turn. But that's not what really got to me. What got to me was the luggage. Natasha's overnight bag was still in the back seat, partially unzipped, and I could see clothes spilling out of it. I opened the car door and pulled the bag toward me, and that's when I saw it. Lingerie. Expensive lingerie. The kind she'd bought for our anniversary last year. The kind she'd modeled for me with that shy smile she does when she's trying to be romantic. Black lace, red silk. Things I recognized immediately because I'd seen them before in our bedroom. She had packed them for him. She had taken the intimate things that belonged to our marriage and brought them to another man. I felt physically sick, but I kept looking because some part of me needed to know absolutely everything. There was a separate, smaller bag, like a toiletry case, and inside were protection, massage oil, and a bottle of expensive wine. This wasn't something spontaneous. This was planned, meticulously and carefully planned. Then I saw the car seat, our nephew's car seat, still strapped into the back seat where I'd installed it 2 weekends ago when my brother and his family had visited us. Natasha had seen that car seat. She had looked at it, known it was there, and still gotten into this car with Jasper Thornton to drive to wherever they were going. She had been willing to risk not just her own life, but potentially a child's life. If circumstances had been different, if my brother had needed us to babysit, if anything had changed in the plan. That's when something fundamental shifted inside me. Up until that moment, part of me had still been thinking of Natasha as my wife, as someone I loved who had hurt me, as someone I might eventually forgive or at least try to understand. But standing there, looking at that car seat, I realized I was looking at the wreckage left by someone I didn't know at all. The Natasha I married would never have been this reckless. The Natasha I married would never have planned something this elaborate. The Natasha I thought I knew didn't actually exist. She never had. I took photos of everything with my phone. The luggage, the lingerie, the toiletry bag, the car seat. I don't know exactly why. Maybe for evidence, maybe for divorce proceedings. Maybe just to prove to myself later that I hadn't imagined any of it. Then, I closed the car door, walked back to my truck, and drove home in complete silence. My phone had 23 missed calls by then. Some from the hospital, some from numbers I didn't recognize, several from Natasha's sister, Veronica. I ignored absolutely all of them. When I got home, I sat down at my computer and looked up divorce attorneys. I read reviews, compared prices, checked credentials. I did it the same way I'd research a new laptop or a vacation destination. Methodically and completely emotionally detached. Because if I let myself actually feel anything, I was going to completely fall apart. I scheduled a consultation for the following week with a guy who specialized in high-conflict divorces. Then I went into our bedroom and started pulling my clothes out of the closet. I wasn't moving out, not yet anyway. But I needed to separate my things from hers because I couldn't look at our shared closet anymore without wanting to burn everything in it. Natasha's sister, Veronica, called again that afternoon, and this time I actually answered. She was crying, asking me where I was, why I hadn't come to the hospital. Didn't I care that Natasha was hurt? What kind of husband abandons his wife when she's injured? I let her finish her entire speech. Then I said, very calmly, that I couldn't be around someone who had lied to me so completely and that I was filing for divorce. Veronica went completely quiet. Then she asked what I was talking about. What lie? And I realized Natasha hadn't told anyone the actual truth. Of course she hadn't. So I told Veronica everything. About calling Bethany. About the fake breakup story. About Jasper Thornton being in the car. About the lingerie and everything else I'd found in the overnight bag. Veronica didn't say anything for a very long time. Then she said she needed to process this information and that she'd call me back. She hung up. She didn't call back that day. And when she did start calling again a few days later, it was to beg me to visit Natasha anyway, because family is family. I guess blood really is thicker than water. Or maybe she just couldn't accept that her sister was capable of something like this. Here's what I want you to understand about all of this. I'm not telling you this story to get sympathy or to prove I was right. I'm telling you because I think a lot of people stay in situations like this out of guilt or obligation, or because they're worried about what other people will think. And I want you to know that sometimes the kindest thing you can do for yourself is walk away from someone who's shown you exactly who they are. Would you have gone to the hospital? Would you have tried to work it out? I'm genuinely curious what you would have done in my position. That night I slept in the guest bedroom for the first time in 4 years. I stared at the ceiling, thinking about car seats and lingerie and utility poles and lies, and I realized something that should have been obvious from the very beginning. I wasn't grieving my wife, I was grieving a person who had never actually existed in the first place. Natasha called me on Monday morning from the hospital and I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Maybe I wanted to hear what she'd say. Maybe I needed confirmation that I was doing the right thing, I don't really know. Her voice was weak and shaky and she asked me where I was, why I hadn't come to see her. Didn't I care that she'd been hurt? She said she'd been asking for me for 3 days and nobody would tell her where I was. She sounded genuinely confused, like she actually couldn't understand why her husband wasn't sitting by her bedside holding her hand. I didn't say anything at first. I just listened to her breathe on the other end of the line. This woman I'd shared a bed with for 4 years, and I felt absolutely nothing. Then I told her, very calmly, that I knew about Jasper Thornton. There was silence. Not the kind of silence where someone's thinking of what to say. The kind of silence where someone's entire world just collapsed and they're trying to figure out how to rebuild it fast enough to salvage something. Then she started crying and saying it wasn't what I thought, that she could explain everything, that it was complicated and I needed to come to the hospital so we could talk in person. I asked her if she'd been with him that night. More silence. Then she said yes, but that I didn't understand the whole situation. I asked her if she'd lied about going to see Bethany. She said yes, but she'd only done it because she didn't know how to tell me the truth. I asked her if she'd packed our anniversary lingerie in her overnight bag to wear for another man. She didn't answer that one. Instead, she started talking about how much pain she was in, how scared she'd been when the car crashed, how she'd thought she was going to die, and all she could think about was me. I told her I'd spoken to Bethany, that I'd seen the car and everything in it, and that I'd already contacted a divorce attorney. She completely lost it then. Started screaming at me through the phone, calling me heartless, asking how I could abandon her when she was lying in a hospital bed, saying I was a monster for caring more about my pride than about her safety. I let her scream until she ran out of steam. Then I said the only thing that actually mattered. You looked me in the eyes and lied to me. I told her that she'd planned this, that she'd used our friend as a cover story, that she'd let me help her pack a bag full of lies, and that I couldn't trust a single word that came out of her mouth anymore. She went quiet again. Then she said something that made me realize just how far gone we really were. She said that what hurt her most wasn't the accident, wasn't even losing me, but that I was being so cruel when she needed me most. Like she was the sufferer here. Like I was the one who'd done something wrong. The pressure came from absolutely everyone after that. Her sister Veronica called me regularly for 2 weeks straight, begging me to at least visit Natasha once, to give her a chance to explain in person, to show some basic human decency. I don't know if Veronica didn't believe what I told her about the affair, or if she just thought family should stick together no matter what happened. But she genuinely seemed to think I was the bad guy in this entire situation. Her parents called me too. Her dad especially, saying I was making a huge mistake, that marriages go through rough patches and you don't just throw away 4 years because of one night. One night, that's what they kept calling it. Like it was a drunk kiss at a party and not a premeditated weekend getaway with another man. I tried explaining it to them, but nobody wanted to actually hear it. They didn't care about the lies or the planning or the fact that their daughter had used our mutual friend as an alibi. All they saw was an injured woman recovering at her sister's place and a husband who wouldn't come see her. I was the villain in their story, and nothing I said was going to change that perception. My own friends were split down the middle. Half of them understood and supported my decision completely. The other half thought I was being too harsh, that I should at least wait until she was fully recovered before making any major decisions about our marriage. But here's what nobody seemed to actually get. This wasn't about the hospital. This wasn't about her being hurt. This was about the fact that the person I'd married didn't exist. The woman recovering at her sister's apartment was a stranger who'd been wearing my wife's face for who knows how long. And I couldn't trust anything about her anymore. How do you forgive someone when you don't even know who they really are? It's not a rhetorical question. I genuinely don't know the answer. I filed for divorce 5 weeks after the accident. Natasha was out of the hospital by then, staying with Veronica, and my attorney served her the papers at her sister's apartment. I didn't do it to be vindictive or cruel. I did it because every day I waited was another day I was lying to myself about whether this marriage could possibly be saved. It couldn't. Some things you can come back from, and some things you absolutely can't. And this was the kind of betrayal that burns the bridge so completely that there's nothing left to rebuild on. The divorce process was absolutely ugly. Natasha fought me on absolutely everything. The house, the savings, the furniture. Like if she could just keep enough pieces of our life together, then maybe it would prove the marriage had meant something real. Her attorney tried every angle they could think of. They argued that I'd abandoned her during a medical emergency, that I'd shown no compassion, that my actions demonstrated I'd already checked out of the marriage long before the accident. They painted this picture of me as this cold, calculating person who'd been looking for an excuse to leave and jumped on the first opportunity. It was complete nonsense, but it still hurt to hear myself described that way in legal documents. My attorney was this older guy named Frank who'd been practicing family law for 30 years. He'd seen everything and nothing surprised him anymore. He told me early on that cases like mine, where there's clear evidence of infidelity, usually settle pretty quickly because the cheating spouse knows they don't have much leverage. But he also warned me that Natasha seemed like the type who'd drag it out as long as possible. Not because she thought she'd win, but because she couldn't accept that it was really over. He was absolutely right about that. Her attorney painted me as cold and unforgiving, said I'd abandoned my wife in her time of need, tried to make the affair seem like a one-time mistake that I was blowing completely out of proportion. My attorney presented the evidence. The phone records that I'd subpoenaed showing months and months of calls and texts between Natasha and Jasper. We each had our own phone plans through our jobs, so I'd never seen the bills. The credit card statements showing hotel rooms and restaurants I'd never been to, charges I'd never questioned because we kept our finances mostly separate and I'd trusted her. The photos I'd taken at the impound lot. It wasn't one night. It had been going on for almost 7 months straight. 7 months of lies. 7 months of looking me in the face every single morning and pretending everything was perfectly fine. 7 months of planning and covering tracks and playing the role of faithful wife while living an entirely separate life I knew absolutely nothing about. When I saw all that evidence laid out in black and white in front of me, I felt vindicated but also completely devastated because it meant I'd been living in a fantasy for more than half a year without even knowing it. The whole divorce process took about 6 months to finalize completely. During that time, I had to rebuild my entire life from scratch. I moved into a small apartment across town, the kind of place I never thought I'd be living in at 33. It was quiet, empty, and exactly what I needed. I threw myself into work, started going to the gym regularly, and slowly began to remember what it felt like to be just myself instead of half of a couple. Some days were harder than others. I'd catch myself reaching for my phone to text Natasha about something funny I'd seen, only to remember that person didn't exist anymore. The hardest part wasn't missing her. It was missing the version of her I thought I knew. My brother was incredibly supportive through everything. He'd come over with pizza and beer and just sit with me, not trying to fix anything or offer advice, just being there. He told me once that he'd always thought something seemed off about Natasha, but he could never quite put his finger on what it was. Looking back, I wonder how many other people saw things I was too blind to notice. Were there signs I missed? Probably. But I also think when you trust someone completely, you interpret everything through that lens of trust. A late night at work is just a late night at work. A new friend is just a new friend. You don't question it because questioning it would mean you don't trust them. And you do trust them, so you don't question it. It's a perfect circle of self-deception. I ran into one of Natasha's coworkers about 4 months after I filed for divorce. She looked uncomfortable when she saw me, like she wasn't sure whether to acknowledge me or pretend she hadn't noticed me. I made it easy for her and just nodded and kept walking. But she called out to me, said she wanted to apologize. I stopped and asked her what she was apologizing for. She said she'd known about Jasper for months, that everyone at Natasha's office had known, and she felt terrible that nobody had told me. She said they all assumed I knew and was okay with it, or that it wasn't their place to get involved. I thanked her for telling me, even though it was way too late to matter, and walked away feeling even more like an idiot than before. Everyone knew. Everyone except me. 7 months after the accident, after the divorce was finalized, and the house had been sold, and we divided everything down to the last coffee mug, I called Natasha one final time, not because I wanted closure or because I'd forgiven her, or because I thought there was anything left to say that actually mattered. I called because I needed her to understand one thing that I don't think she ever really had. When she answered, I could hear the hope in her voice. Like maybe this was me calling to say I'd made a mistake, that I wanted her back. I didn't let her talk. I just told her the truth as clearly as I possibly could. I didn't leave because you were in that car with him, I said. I left because you were willing to lie so easily, to plan so carefully, to risk so much just to have what you wanted. I left because I realized that if you could do all that, then I had no idea what else you might be capable of. And I couldn't spend the rest of my life waiting to find out. She was quiet for a very long time. Then she said something about how I'd never understand what it was like to feel trapped, to need something I couldn't give her, to be desperate enough to make bad choices. Like that explained anything, like that made it okay. I told her I hoped she found whatever she was looking for, that I genuinely meant that, but that I couldn't be part of her life anymore because I didn't know who she was and I didn't trust who she might become. Then I hung up. That was 3 months ago. I haven't spoken to her since. Sometimes people ask me if I regret not going to the hospital that night and if I wish I'd handled things differently, if I think I was too harsh. And honestly, no, I don't regret it at all. Because the truth is, I didn't abandon my injured wife. I protected myself from a person who'd been lying to me so long and so well that I'd started to believe the fantasy was real. And maybe that makes me cold, maybe that makes me heartless, but it also makes me free. Some people survive car crashes. I survived a marriage to someone I never really knew. Here's what I've learned from all of this. Trust isn't just about believing someone won't hurt you. It's about believing that if they do hurt you, it'll be because they made a mistake, not because they planned it. Natasha didn't make a mistake. She made a series of calculated choices over 7 months. And each one of those choices told me exactly who she was. I just wish I'd been paying attention sooner. I've also learned that you can't save someone who doesn't want to be saved, and you can't fix a relationship when the other person has already checked out. Natasha had checked out months before that accident. She'd been living a double life. And I was just the convenient cover story that made it all possible. The stable husband at home, while she explored whatever it was she thought she was missing. I've learned that closure is overrated. People talk about needing closure like it's this magical thing that'll make everything make sense. But sometimes there is no closure. Sometimes people do terrible things for reasons that'll never make sense to you, and you just have to accept that and move on anyway. I've learned that the people who truly care about you will support your decisions, even when they don't fully understand them. My brother never once questioned my choice to walk away. He just showed up, brought pizza, and let me talk when I needed to talk, and sit in silence when I needed silence. That's real support. Not the people who tell you what you should do or how you should feel, but the people who just stand beside you while you figure it out yourself. If there's one thing I want you to take away from my story, it's this. When someone shows you who they really are, believe them the first time. Don't wait for the second chance, or the explanation or the apology. Just believe them and act accordingly. It might save you months or years of living in a lie. And to everyone out there who's ever felt guilty for walking away from someone who hurt them, you don't owe anyone your suffering. Not your spouse, not your family, not your friends, and definitely not strangers on the internet who think they know better. You owe yourself peace. And sometimes peace means walking away from people you once loved. That's not cruelty, that's survival.